And yet, with so much knowledge, with so much mimamsa, with so much critical analysis, debate, dialectics, and so on, Bharat's philosophies are still not part of mainstream philosophy of the world. I have identified three reasons for that. In my upcoming book on Indian philosophies, I've written in greater detail, but for today's talk, I'm going to focus on reason number one, which is racism in philosophy. So the three reasons that I have identified why Bharat's philosophies are not part of mainstream and why they should be is racism in philosophy. Number two is seeing Indian philosophies through European lens. If you look at Indian philosophies, which is multi-dimensional through one monocular mono vision, you will only see one color, the exclusion of everything else. So you don't get the big picture. And that is reason number two. Reason number three is misinterpreting, either unknowingly or deliberately, misinterpreting the meaning of the concepts in Indian philosophies. See, I mentioned earlier, most of the Indologists, so who is an Indologist, right? So an Indologist is a person who studies Indian knowledge systems from primary sources such as Vedas and Upanishads. So they actually go to the primary sources and not from the secondary sources. They go to the not from somebody else's translation. They go to the primary source and get the knowledge and study it. He or she is the true Indologist, and for that they need to have a good. They need two things. One is they need to understand the language in which it is written, which is Sanskrit, and they need to have a living experience. They need to actually live the culture to understand what they mean. Simply studying the language is not enough. Simply living here in India is not enough. You have to have both. So most of the Indologists lack adequate knowledge of Sanskrit and adequate experience, adequate living experience. And yet they are the authorities and they misinterpret either deliberately or unknowingly the concepts impregnated in Indian philosophies. These are the three reasons that, of course, there may be minor other reasons that you may identify, but these are the three main reasons that I have identified. Number one, racism in philosophy. This gets more interesting here. Peter Park, an assistant professor of historical studies at University of Texas, had written an interesting, and in fact, it's a very important book. I recommend the audience to get a hold of this book, at least the summary of this book, to see, to uncover the greatest cover-up in the history of philosophy. His book is titled Africa, Asia, and the History of Philosophy, Racism in the Formation of Philosophical Canon. So watch this carefully. Racism in the Formation of Philosophical Canon. He covers the period between 1780 to 1830, just 50 years, but he does a great job. He shows how European philosophers of the late 18th and 19th centuries overturned the existing landscape of the philosophical history and made it Eurocentric by excluding Asian philosophies and their original contribution to the field of philosophy. Now, Dan Flory is a professor who teaches philosophy of race at Montana University. He mentions that the stakes of this debate, the debate meaning the philosophical history, the history of philosophy, this debate is important. The stakes of this debate were and remain extraordinarily high, for in the late 18th and early 19th century, the claims of originality and invention of philosophy, including, we should note, what later became natural as well as social sciences, including medical science, technology, philosophy, ethics, social sciences, sociology, all of this, the bedrock of all this was made Eurocentric. Prior to 1700s, it was not. We'll see what it was in the next three slides. And so the stakes of this debate are high. And he argues that the overall argument was racial white supremacy for this uh, overturning or conversion. Now, what is the original philosophy? Prior to the 18th century, specifically pre-1780s, majority of the European, see, in this, watch what I title here, Asia-centric. The original history was Asia-centric. Prior to the 18th century, specifically pre-1780s, majority of the European philosophers agreed that philosophies originated in the Orient. They used to call East as Orient in the past. Okay, the terms such as Orient, Asia Minor, they have all been gone in the literature now. But if you look at the older textbooks, you will see terms like Orient, which means East. So prior to the 18th century, majority of the European philosophers agreed that philosophies originated in the East, and from there, knowledge migrated to Persia and Egypt, and from there, it was picked by Ionian philosophers like Pythagoras, who settled and spread that knowledge to the ancient Greece. So actually, knowledge migrated from the East to West, and from there, it spread to the rest of the world again. If you look at the older philosophers, like before 1700s, you will see 17 or 1800s, you will see one Thomas Hobbes, who wrote in 1651 in Leviathan. Here, first were great and flourishing cities. There was first the study of philosophy. The gymnosophists of India. Gymnos means naked, like semi-naked sadhus of Jains, or we see sadhus who are the Brahmins and the sadhus who are semi-naked. Gymnos means naked. Sophists means are good orators who speak well, who are teachers. The gymnosophists of India, the Magi of Persia, the priests of Egypt are counted as the most ancient philosophers. And from there, the world derived knowledge. So that is Thomas Hobbes. And then you have George Berkeley in the mid 18th century saying it is allowed by all that Greeks derived much of their philosophy from the Eastern nations. So the Greeks derived much of their philosophy from the Eastern nations. So this Asia-centric philosophy was changed to Eurocentric philosophy. We'll see how. Now, we see this is the new history. This is the distorted history, which is now Eurocentric. Peter Park mentions in his book that the prominent European philosophers, Immanuel Kant, George Hegel, etc., beginning in the 18th century till the current date, cleverly revised this westward migration of knowledge and firmly declared that all philosophy originated in the Greeks and spread eastwards. You see this, just like Aryan migration theory, you'll see this philosophy migrated from the east to the west. Now, these are some of the quotes by the famous Kantian and Hegelian, from Kant and Hegel, Kantian and Hegelian philosophers. This is the reversal of the earlier position. Indian art, religion, and philosophy lacked maturity in concept and practice. And although German Romanticism had enthusiastically hailed India as the land of origins, origins means the land of origin of philosophy, Europe has long and rightfully overcome it. That is George Hegel. And then you see Bertrand Russell, philosophy as distinct from theology began in Greece in the 16th century. Somehow everybody feels like everything originated starting from the 6th century BC in the Greece. Philosophy, art, sciences, medicine, technology, everything originated somehow in the 16th century. And all these philosophers are convinced and brainwashed into thinking, including us these days. Then Peter Adamson, in his 2014 classical philosophy, he wrote about history of philosophy without any gaps. So the people started writing history of philosophy, mentioning that our story, meaning The story of the world began in the 6th century BC with Thales, the first ever philosopher. 6th century BC, Thales, he is considered the first ever philosopher, and the world began to accept this. Forget about Patanjali, Panini, Vatsayana, Kanada, Patanjali, Jaimini. Everybody is gone. Nobody appears in the philosophical canons anymore. It is the Thales or the Thales, Pythagoras, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, and now Kant, Hegel, and so on. And Catherine Osborne in 2004 observes or mentions some bright sparks on the eastern edges of Greek world invented philosophy. So they cannot dismiss that there is an Eastern influence, and yet they say that it is still the Greek that invented the philosophy. And so you see this overturning of tables here from the Oriental origin of philosophy to the Eurocentric version of the philosophy, where everything originated in the Greece. And now the distortion continues. In a coordinated campaign, these German philosophers, so it started in the 17th and 18th century, and the Kant and Hegelian schools of thought and their successors, especially two of them, Christoph Miner and Wilhelm Tennemann, and the like, who are influenced by Kant and Hegel, produced numerous publications favoring exclusion of Asia's contribution. So they made a conscious and a massive attempt by writing, producing a lot of work in the literature and speaking widely in the circles, in the academic circles, that Asia has nothing to do with philosophy, they're unworthy of philosophical studies, and therefore needs to be excluded completely from the mainstream philosophy. If you want to study Asian philosophy um, as a minor or as a elective, it's okay to do it, but that's not part of the mainstream philosophy, right? So that is how they excluded ancient Asia's contribution. The same influencers, these guys, who the German philosophers, the British philosophers, and European philosophers, they were also successful in excluding Asia's contribution to the history of sciences. Ganita Shastra, the invention of zero, cosmology, the debunking of the heliocentric theory, the atomism of Kanada, the mind body spirit theories of Ayurveda, Charaka, Sushruta, all of these from astronomy, mathematics, and medicines is all excluded from the philosophical. And therefore, we talked about why the bedrock of sciences is philosophy, right? So if your sciences do not have your philosophy, then that part is missing. So all of our sciences, the current sciences we deal with, is Eurocentric, and in that there is no Asiatic philosophy in it or Indian philosophy in it, and therefore it will be missing of all contribution from the Asian philosophers. Now it doesn't end there. The Kantian and Hegelian philosophers, which means Kant, Immanuel Kant, and Hegel, took upon themselves the role of custodians of true philosophy by providing arguments and justifying their positions to create an indisputable position of European reason by affirming that no non-European group could develop true philosophy. Nobody is unworthy of developing true philosophy except the European philosophers. And this resulted in complete absence of Asian, which, when I say Asian thought, you have to include the Chinese also. They're also great philosophers. Of course, we talk about Indian philosophies because we know a great detail about them, and less, because I'm a medical doctor. I'm based in United States, and I have studied Ayurveda. I have studied Chinese philosopher, Chinese medicine, including acupuncture and Chinese traditional medicine and so on. They do have great philosophy. Of course, there is a lot of similarities, and it has been said that a lot of sciences or the philosophy originated from India and spread to Asiatic countries such as China, Japan, through Buddhism in the 5th to 7th century through Chinese travelers. I'll give you an interesting real life example. When I was treating my patients, one of my professors, she's an English professor, she's an American professor, Caucasian professor. So she does acupuncture, but she also uses chakras and things like that. She's an allopathic medicine physician. One of my professors who was actually retiring, she would use a combination of what we call integrated medicine. And I asked her one day, why do you mix Chinese medicine and Indian medicine? And she looked at me and said, Rajeev, you should be knowing this. You are from India. Don't you know that all sciences originated from India and spread to the rest of the world? And therefore, if you touch Indian science, you have touched the rest of all the sciences. And I kind of felt ashamed because I should be knowing this, right? And yet I don't. And most of us don't. And so we should be ashamed that we don't know. And part of it is because of how the distortion of the history happened. And because we don't know about our philosophies. In fact, Rabindranath Tagore lamented on this. And he has written extensively on this. Of course, we know Vivekananda did the same. And yet, even in 2023, we still are ignorant about our own philosophies. And now we know the reason, because of the distortion of the philosophical canon itself. Philosophical canon means the entire canon of philosophy that people study in academic schools.